Something I was thinking about before, and something I actually thought about quite a lot during Nora's testimony, was the fact of how fruit makes fruit. How that the fact that I am even a Christian today is that I was the fruit of my parents as well as my pastor. And that I was led to Christ and could not have had that without having good examples and wise teachers. Paul actually says, how can they hear if no one preaches to them? You see, with every single one of us, we at one point depended on another. We at one point learned from another, and we at one point were without that person. You see, we are the way that we are. But through the guidance of others, sometimes we can learn where we fall. Sometimes we can learn where we misstep. Typically, that is the parents. Typically, that would be a teacher, or a preacher, or a government official, or anyone else of a high rank. And as a matter of fact, this message I had prepared for Mother's Day. So I've had 2 weeks actually for this message. And one of the things that was key was a mother. A mother leaves a great impact on her children. Now, this is not to say that without the father, that the child can grow up fine. But a mother has a pivotal impact on a child. And here we have a mother and a mother-in-law, Naomi. Now Naomi and her husband leave Judah because of a famine. They had no food, they were starving, they left and went to Moab. Now, just for a brief piece of history on Moab, Moab was a bad place. It was a really bad place. As a matter of fact, I know it's somewhat of a nickname as well, but one of the U.S. Army's most powerful bombs is called the Moab. What it means is the mother of all bombs. But Moab was known for its desolation. Moab was known for its destruction. They followed the king deities of what I would say is evil. Now, some were followed more than others, but gods such as Astarte or Tammuz or Molech and Dagon, all of these were followed within Moab. And they changed throughout centuries who they would follow and who they would not follow, but they were a polytheist society. They didn't believe in this god or that god, they believed in them all and would use them for whatever benefited them at the time. This god was the god of fertility. Well, we need that. Let's use this god at this time. Oh, the god of war, the god of storms and thunder. We'll use that one at this time. So they were polytheists. They were actually so wicked that you were essentially banned from associating with them. Now, this did not mean that all of them were cursed. But God knew their wickedness and God knew their influence and told the Israelites to stay away from them. To not associate and to certainly not to marry with them. The Moabites were among the groups that were told you weren't meant to marry with. But in famine, in desperation, they had nowhere else to go. Moab was prosperous. Our God clearly doesn't favor us. Why don't we go over and see if maybe their land is more favored? Now, this did not mean that necessarily they were forsaking God, but they left Judah to go to Moab. And Elimelech and Naomi, they had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They were of the tribe of Ephraim. And what they did was they were of the tribe of Ephrathah, and they were in Bethlehem. Now Micah actually talks about Bethlehem Ephrathah, which is where Jesus was born. So this ended up being a very important lineage. But it says they came into the country of Moab and they continued there. They stayed there. They made home. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. And they took of them wives of the women of Moab. Now this was the first mistake. Now understand, they had no real other options. They were thinking, we're in Moab. Yeah, we're Israelites, but these are the women that are around us. What are we going to do? Find an Israelite woman in Moab? They took what they had. And they took upon them wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Naomi was the only one in her family left. Of the 4 who were there, Naomi was the only one left. But she wasn't alone. She had Naomi and Orpah. Naomi and Orpah, this back then, the mother-in-law was not seen as... I watch these comedy shows. I watched an old show called The Honeymooners. And I remember there was a scene where I think his name was Norm. He hated his mother-in-law. And she was seen as the worst thing in the world to him. Well, back in Israel, the mother-in-law treated you like you were her own child, her own son or her own daughter, especially if it was her son's wives. So it wasn't like she was just the mother-in-law. It was as though she was their mother. She would have treated them as her own. But it says here, then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. So the famine, the whole reason they went to Moab, it was over. The Lord had provided for them. They no longer had to fear the food. So why stay in Moab? So it says, wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. Now, it's tricky to read this because we're just reading it as plain text. But Naomi was not saying this as a blessing. She was acknowledging that they did well. She said that they dealt kindly with her and with her sons. But she was upset. She was angry. I mean, any mother who lost her sons and her husband would be as well. So she's upset, and her emotions are not very stable. As a matter of fact, and I won't be going this far tonight, but down in verse 20, you'll read that she asked them to call her a different name, Mara, which means bitterness, because she believed the Lord dealt bitterly with her. So she was bitter. She was upset. I mean, if you lost your 2 sons, would you not be? But she acknowledges that they dealt with her kindly. And she says, the Lord deal with you kindly. She said, the Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. Now when she kisses them, that's goodbye. That was their way of saying goodbye, farewell. She's saying at this point, go home, go to your own mother's house, find your own husbands, leave. And she's trying to say it as kindly, but to be honest, she's heartbroken, and maybe they remind her of her children. It doesn't go all in depth, but she does believe that what would be best for them is to go home. And why does she say that? Well, they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. They want to go home with her. And Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say, I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. Now, it's hard to really express what she's saying, but she is quite angry. She's too old to bear children. She doesn't have a husband. And even if she did, she knows they're not going to wait the 20 years for her sons to grow up. And even if they did, then would Naomi and Orpah be of childbearing age? She recognizes she can't provide for them the husband. And she's thinking, this is impossible. You don't have a future with me. A future cannot be provided for you. So go home. Now, I just want to say, she has good intentions here. She wants them to have a good life. But she's not doing all right here. But here, after she says, the hand of the Lord is gone out against me, and they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. That is, she left. But Ruth clave unto her, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So Naomi, after trying to send her two daughters-in-law away, realizes Ruth is not leaving. But Ruth isn't just not leaving. Ruth is making a promise here. And they left together. See, Naomi is saying, there is no hope for you with a husband. You don't have a future here. You need to go. And Orpah listens. Orpah listens to what Naomi says, and Orpah thinks she's probably right. Goodbye, mother-in-law. And she goes home. And Naomi says that she goes back to her gods. What did Naomi do here? And why did Ruth not listen? See, everything Naomi says makes sense. You don't have husbands here. You don't have a future here. You're Moabites. You should go back to Moab. You should go back to your mothers who will take care of you. You will find another husband. Go back to Moab and you will find one. But what she's saying there is you can't find one here. Now I think through her lens it makes sense. You can't find one here. You definitely can't be part of my family. If you're going to stay in Judah, why stay with me? Why care about Naomi? And though they both love her, it says that they want to go with her. I just want to say that for a moment, is Naomi set a good example. Naomi truly meant something to them. Why else would they want to go with her? You see, back then, and actually even with many people nowadays, the tradition was the younger would take care of the older. And the Bible actually lays that out as what you should do. The younger should take care of the older. As the older took care of the younger would return that. So Naomi had everything to gain by having them come and take care of her and serve her, clean her house, go out and glean for her. But Naomi sent them away because she cared about them, but she didn't trust that they would be provided for. See, there's a reason that this is the book of Ruth. This is not the book of Naomi. Naomi had earnest intentions, but Naomi still did wrong. And I would say it wasn't just Naomi. It looks as though it was everyone in her family. We know very little about Elimelech, and we know even less about Mahlon and Chilion. But what we know gives us some insight about who they were, and especially about who Naomi was. What we know is that when the famine came, they went to Moab. Now, when the famine came over Israel in the 40 years in the wilderness, when they were hungry, the Lord provided food for them. When they were thirsty, the Lord provided water for them. Every Israelite would have known this. You ask even non-Israelites today, even people in Islam, and even I would say Hindus, ask them who Moses was. They know who he was. So why would they fear the famine? Even more so is why they still fear the famine. See, why did they return to Judah? They returned to Judah not because they heard food was there, but it says that they had heard that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Naomi knew that the Lord was still blessing, that the Lord was still taking care of his people. But Naomi didn't trust that the Lord would take care of Ruth and Orpah. As a matter of fact, Naomi, I mentioned earlier, she changed her name to Mara. It says, "For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me." She believed in God. She believed in Yahweh. She believed in the one true God. But she didn't trust that he would take care of her. She believed that he was punishing her. She believed that the death of her sons was God's judgment. But because of this, she also believed these Moabites would not be taken care of. She said, "Orpah, you have no husband here. Ruth, you have no husband here. Orpah, you are not part of my family. Why would you stay with me?" She says, "Ruth, you're not part of the family. Orpah, go back to your home. Ruth, go back to your home." And they both hear this. They both come from Moab. And Orpah goes back, but Ruth does not. So what is the difference between Orpah and Ruth? As a matter of fact, the same difference between Naomi and Ruth was that trust. See, Orpah did not trust God either. But that made sense. She grew up following the other gods. It says that she went back to her gods. To her, there was no great God. It was just whoever could help you at this time. Maybe she believed in the Lord Yahweh, but he was that other God. When I'm in Israel, I'll pray to him. When I'm in Moab, I'll pray to them. When I'm in Babylon, I'll pray to them. But Ruth doesn't say that. Ruth says this, "And thy God be my God." She doesn't add Yahweh to her myriad of gods, or to her pantheon, she acknowledges He is the true God. See, even though she came from Moab, Moab was one of the most depraved nations. It came from Moab, the son of Lot's daughter, who was conceived in a great iniquity. But even though she came from Moab, I can firmly say she had more trust in the Lord than any of the others. For even Naomi, who knew that the Lord was providing the food for Israel, she didn't think He could provide a husband. Well, the question is do we think Ruth just lived there, believing to die alone? If so, it's a great service. But I think even more than that. Was Ruth, it doesn't say, the Lord will provide this for me. It doesn't even say, the Lord will protect me. She just makes a promise. Because sometimes we make a promise that the Lord will take care of me, the Lord will make me wealthy, the Lord will feed me. And I hate to say it, but sometimes it's not the Lord's plan for us. She didn't say the Lord will even bring me a husband. She just says, where thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. And does she say then, I will marry one of thy people, or one of thy family? She just cuts the end. And where thou diest, I will die, and there will I also be buried. She's making a promise to be an Israelite. Now, did that mean she was now descended from Jacob? No. But she made that promise to become one of God's chosen people. And she promises to die wherever Naomi goes. Now, if you continue reading, you'll see Naomi didn't quite appreciate this. But in the end, Naomi's heart is turned by Ruth's loyalty. See, though Naomi gave her an offer, an incredible offer, go back home, start your life new, Ruth chose something above that. She chose loyalty, and she chose to trust in the Lord. I don't think Ruth knew how her life would end. But I think she knew that Yahweh had a way. She may not have known that the Lord had Boaz in her way. But the Lord knew. And she knew that if that was His plan, that He had a plan for her. And if His plan was for her to die alone, she was going to die alone worshiping Him. That is what set Ruth above Orpah. See, Orpah heard the things of this world, the temporal things. She heard, I can almost certainly get a husband here. I can probably live great here. I can go back to my mother. I could live well. I could go back to Moab. I would be provided for. But Ruth wasn't thinking on those temporal things. She chose to be loyal to her mother and loyal to her God. She then knew who God was. And we know she knew about the Lord before this because she knew that Naomi followed one God. So what do we see here? It's an example of Naomi's, and I'll say this, though it doesn't say it directly. We can see that their devotion to Naomi shows that Naomi cared for them. And when Naomi was fallen into disarray, when she fell into bitterness and to speaking against the very God who protected her, who kept her alive when the rest of her family died, Ruth set an example. And just to skip to the end, we see, and I think I just want you guys to turn with me to Ruth chapter 4, verses 14 through 17. Because we see Naomi lamenting over the fact that she didn't have a child, lamenting over the fact that she had no one left, that there would be no one for her to care for. She lost her 2 sons. But here we have, and the woman said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom, and became nurse unto it. And the women her neighbors gave it a name, saying, There is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So though she didn't always trust the Lord, as a matter of fact, she was pushing against the Lord, to the point where that because of her thinking on this world, Orpah went and followed the false gods. Because Naomi was thinking on the things of this world, Orpah fell into darkness. But because she turned back to the Lord, because she followed after the God of Israel, and because Ruth set that example, Naomi got that blessing that she lacked. Those sons that were taken away from her, she was given. And even more than that, her son bore a son named Jesse, and that son bore a son named David. And we know from that son, all the way down, we get Jesus Christ. And just think about that. If it were not for Ruth's loyalty, if it were not for Ruth's willing to stay and care for Naomi, willing to stay and worship her God, a God that she had not known, that her father did not know, that her people did not worship, if it were not for Ruth's choice to follow after the one true God, willing to turn away everything that she was told would give her blessings, if it were not for that, we would not have that holy line that went all the way down to the very Savior, our very Redeemer. So I want to say at this time that if there's anyone out there, anyone who's thinking at this time that they don't know who they should follow, if you don't know if you're following God, is God just to you? And this is something I mentioned earlier at Seton. It's one of the most important messages I think people can hear. Is God to us just another in our pantheon? And what's our pantheon? Is our riches a God up there? Is our car our God up there? Is our popularity our God up there? And is God just this thing over here that gives us heaven? Or is this God over here the one who gives us blessings? See, we are to be thankful for everything God's given us, but is He just something that gives to us? Dagon and Molech were just something that gave to the people. What makes God different in our lives? What made God someone worth Ruth abandoning everything she had to follow Him? And if God is worth all that for her, what is God worth for you? So the altar is open. If you would like to rededicate your life, if you would like to ask for a renewal of life, if you would like to be baptized, rebaptized, if there's something you need prayer for, whatever you need, anything you need, you can bring forward to God. But whatever you need, we invite you to come as we sing. The altar is open.